Hello YouTube, and welcome to this episode of Ishiro Honda-thon. Today, I'm going to be talking about a movie that has a ridiculous amount of fan following behind it. In fact, I'm talking about it because there's quite a few reviews of this online, but none of them go into a total amount of depth that I kind of want to go into with this film. So, blah, 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 blah. That's why I'm going to talk about it. And also, another reason why I'm a little hesitant to talk about this movie is because I do have an absolute ridiculous amount of love for this movie. I feel like if I talk about it, I won't exactly do it justice. And even though I am going to be going into great depth here, I don't really feel that I'm going to be doing this movie any justice whatsoever. But this is Rodan, made in 1956. Ishiro Honda, I believe this is Ishiro Honda's first color film, as well as the first color kaiju film to ever be made. You know, I am... Another reason why I'm very hesitant to talk about this is because this is a very personal film for me. I adore this movie to death. I do. To me, this is the definition of a classic. This movie is genuinely great. I mean, we have great effects, great performances, a beautiful soundtrack. Everything with this movie is just good. All right, it's just great. I mean, this movie was definitely made out of the success of the previous tokusatsu movies that were released. I mean, Half Human was a half success the little time that it was released. But Godzilla became kind of a big fucking hit for Toho. And so was Godzilla Raids Again. There is no doubt in my mind that Tanaka's decision to go with Ishiro Honda to make another giant monster movie as a cash-in to the original Godzilla, there's no doubt in my mind that that's why he went to Honda. Honda was good at this stuff. Honda was good at, you know, working with visual effects. He was good at working with Eiji Tsuburaya and his mastery. And so it's no surprise that Tanaka will go to him for a movie such as ambitious as this. Because this movie, Rodan, in some ways, was also a huge experiment piece. I mean, Godzilla is the original Godzilla is definitely a definition of an experiment piece. But this movie is also a huge experiment piece. It's experimental because this was not only being shot in the daylight, this movie. I mean, a lot of this movie takes place during the day, especially with the Rodans. But above that, and better off, this movie was also being shot in color. Toho was, I believe, the first company to really get into the color craze that, you know, happened in the 1950s, especially in Japan. And so they released, I believe it was a samurai movie that was released in color, and that also had some tokusatsu aspects in it. And then they released this. So this was like the movie to start some of the color craze in Japan. That being said, this was not a tiny movie. It wasn't. This movie had a big budget, you know, or a larger budget than a lot of tokusatsu kaiju movies that would be released a little down the line. This movie had, you know, a lot of things going for it that were very experimental, very, you know, they were making this in the mentality like, oh, what if we did this? What if we did this? The only other kaiju tokusatsu movie that I can compare it to is Godzilla vs. Biollante, made in 1989, where Kawakita would very much so play with, you know, how to move the Biollante or what the design of the Biollante would go, and they played with stop motion, they did all this, they did all that. That is the closest thing that I can really compare this movie to, is that. But that was made way down the line. So again, this is a very big experiment piece, blah, 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 blah. And this is also not written by the guy who normally wrote kaiju stuff. The person that Ishiro Honda went to mostly from this point on, in terms of kaiju movies and so on and so forth, was he wrote the Mysterians and everything. Go watch that if you want me more to talk about that guy. This one was written by Takashi Kimura, and Takashi Kimura was more of, as I've already said in the Matango review previous in Ishiro Honda-thon, if you want full details, my friend Patrick Galvin goes into great detail about Takashi Kimura there. But to sum it up, he was a very pessimistic man. He very much so believed in the individual and not the collective body. Because he didn't trust the collective body. He trusted individuals. He hated Tokyo. He was afraid that he was going to die there, which he did. He died a horrible, horrible death in Tokyo. That's just utterly utterly sad. And he was just very pessimistic. He didn't like really much of anything. And so a lot of the movies that he worked on were the ones that were the movies that were darker in tone, that had a lot more allegory to them, that were very bleak, not so much in your face kind of stuff. And that really comes out in droves here. You know, just to list some of the movies that Takashi Kimura wrote, you know, beforehand, or that he would write after this. He wrote Frankenstein Conquers the World, which isn't exactly the best example of his work, but, you know, the Frankenstein, who was a very sympathetic character, and so on and so forth. And he wrote Matango. He wrote, anyways, like The Human Vapor. He wrote a lot of those movies that... Shinichi Sekizawa is the other writer, sorry. My mind's all over the place. But he wrote a lot of those darker Ishiro Honda movies, and those are the movies that I think were the best Ishiro Honda movies. But most of all, he wrote my third favorite Ishiro Honda movie of all time. He wrote War of the Gargantuas, which was very much so the monsters are the characters of the story, not the humans. You know, he was that kind of man. He was that kind of man that would go out there, and he often made the monsters the sympathetic characters, the monsters the both focus of the movie and also the tragedy of the movie. And, you know, that comes out in droves here in Rodan, because there's a lot of... I'm a huge fan of parallel lines. And we'll get into more of these parallel lines between two human characters and the two Rodans later in the movie, or later in the review. But he was the person who put in the parallel lines between the two human lovers and the two Rodans. And it is absolutely beautifully executed. This will always be my favorite Kimura script. This will. I think this movie is beautifully executed, beautifully well done, in terms of its writing style, in terms of how it's executed, in terms of how it's portrayed in the movie. I think this is the best it's probably ever really done. And that being said, this is just an amazingly structured film. The basic plot outline is that there's this mining town, right, and in this mining town, these bugs come out and start eating people, and they're like, oh shit, and then all of a sudden, the bugs disappear after a series of earthquakes, and then we discover that they were eaten by these two Rodans that then wreak havoc all over Japan. That's the basic outline of the movie. And why I think this movie is beautifully structured is because things just start piling on top of the other, right? It's not just like, this is it. It's not like, this is the basic plot, it's from point A to point B. There is so much shit in this movie that I like. It isn't just like a standard movie usually has 2 points. It has point A and point B. You know, and the movie revolves around you getting from point A to point B. A lot of kaiju films do that, for example. Frankenstein Conquers the World, for example, is that. War of the Gargantuas is that. So on. So even Godzilla is like that. For example, the original Godzilla would be Godzilla arrives, we need to kill Godzilla. That's point A, point B. Here, there's not only that, there's like a point A, B, C, and D. There's, you know, the bugs arrive in a mining company. We got to stop the bugs. The Rodans arrive. Then we got to stop the Rodans. It's like one thing is piled on top of the other, and they're beautifully interwoven together. They are beautifully... It just meshes very, very well. And you know, this isn't like some of the other later kaiju films where it's some of that interwovenness is kind of clunky. I mean... And to go an example of, I mean, this wasn't written by Kimura, that was written by Shinichi Sekizawa, but we just reviewed Dogora. Dogora is a movie where things are very clunky. This isn't clunky. To me, this comes together very well. Because it's done very well, I think we have a movie that stands out in the kaiju genre. This movie isn't just a good kaiju movie. This movie isn't just a good special effects movie. This movie isn't just a good horror movie. Yes, this is a very horror movie-esque. In fact, I think this is actually, personally, from all the movies that I've seen, this is Ishiro Honda's darkest and grittiest film. Is this movie here, Rodan. This isn't kind of like... this movie isn't like Godzilla 2014. Why some people make that connection, it's beyond me, but Godzilla 2014 had the problem of you know Godzilla's there, but they just focus on the Mutos, And that's it. And the movie doesn't focus on the right thing, or at least that's my personal opinion of it. Here, the movie just... Right, it focuses on these Maganura, the worms. And then it shifts from that to Rodan. Rodan isn't in it beforehand. And it also makes a better build-up to Rodan, because once Rodan arrives, the Maganura just disappear, and Rodan is the main focus of the movie. And which it should be, which I applaud it for. This movie knew... Kimura knew where this movie was supposed to focus. We have these two human characters, right, that we genuinely like, and all the other characters just are kind of there to progress the plot. They didn't need to be three-dimensional characters. They didn't have to be, because the movie knew we needed to focus on those two lovers and the Rodans. And that was the main purpose of the movie. It's really hot in here. That was the main focus of the movie, and so the movie knew where to focus. And I've always liked that when a script, and I've suffered from falling into this trap too. A lot of movies sometimes don't know exactly where they focus. They focus on too many things at one time. They focus on every character needs to be three-dimensional. Every character needs to have their own arc. Every character needs to blah, 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 etc., etc., etc. I don't believe that. I believe if a movie knows where it needs to focus and focuses on them, that's great. And that's actually, to me, better done than having every single character be three-dimensional and everything like that, or being because usually what happens is, as a result of that, you have a convoluted idea. You have an Alien 3 syndrome, where either they're not developed enough, or they're developed too much, and you're just kind of, it's convoluted. Kimura knew where to focus, and he focused on it, and so did Ishiro Honda picked up on it, and Agent Tsuburaya picked up on it, and it clicked. And that being said, this movie is fantastically paced. For reasons I've already said. For those reasons, this movie is just fantastically paced. Even the American cut of the movie is also really well paced. The American cut movie is a lot quicker than this, because the American cut, first off, this is a very short movie to begin with. This movie, the Japanese cut of this movie is only, there's people moving upstairs, there is only an hour and 22 minutes. The American cut is 10 minutes shorter. They cut out 10 minutes worth of footage. So this isn't like Godzilla versus Mothra, or Mothra versus Godzilla, where it's like they just rearranged a couple scenes. This isn't like Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, where all they did was rearrange a couple scenes. No, a lot was cut out of the American cut. But even that version is amazingly paced. I mean, this is why I love Ishiro Honda, and so especially early Ishiro Honda, because that enthusiasm comes over in droves here. And because of that, the movie is just wonderfully executed. There's like an enthusiasm behind this entire movie. There's a heartbeat and soul behind this whole movie. You can tell that that soul is that of Ishiro Honda and Kimura and stuff like that, and Eiji Tsuburaya, especially with how good the visual effects are. And it's wonderful, absolutely wonderful, to see it here, because there's so much detail put into the editing. There's so much detail with how where the music comes in and where the music fades out, or where the music cuts out, or where the sound effects go. Like one of them, for example, during the attack on Fukuoka, you can hear people screaming, but we'll get into that a little later, and so on and so forth. And also, just another thing, this is the last thing I'm going to talk about the script, because I do believe the script is very, very good. This movie is full of foreshadow. I'm going to name two examples that really stick out. For example, there is a news report scene of all these UFOs being spotted all around the world, and it is stated that all these sightings of UFOs mean that there can't just be one, because they're going on almost simultaneously at the same time. So that foreshadows to two Rodans, right? And then, of course, the extreme heat in the summer leading to the monsters coming out, because there's a single line that says, where one of the heads of the mine says to Shigeru, who was played by Kenji Sahara, he goes, "Man, it's really hot out." And Shigeru is like, "It's global warming. The Earth just keeps getting hotter and hotter and hotter," and that results in the monsters coming to life. I love that. I love foreshadow. I love it when scripts are smart enough to do that. Now, as I said earlier, this is an experiment piece that parallels Godzilla because of all the color, because of all the shooting in the daylight. This is basically Tanaka going like, what can I do to make this bigger? What can I do to make this genre bigger? Because we have money here. What can I do to make it bigger and make it better? So, Ishiro Honda once again came in, right? Tanaka's like, "You're directing this movie." And Ishiro Honda, unlike later in his career, was like, "Yes!" And Ishiro Honda came in, and once again, he hired a bunch of new faces. Ishiro Honda was known for doing that, for hiring young actors or actresses who were just starting off in the business and giving them a kickstarter to their career. It was kind of like what Rod Serling did with the Twilight Zone, the original Twilight Zone, with actors like William Shatner, Robert Duvall, and so on and so forth. Ishiro Honda hired Kenji Sahara. This is the biggest one of the film. He hired Kenji Sahara, Kenji Sahara was always admitted and always spoke that he was very grateful for Honda giving him the chance to play in this kind of role, to play in this movie. And Ishiro Honda was responsible for kickstarting Kenji Sahara's career, much like how Ishiro Honda was responsible for kickstarting Akira Takarada's career from the original Godzilla. And in fact, Kenji Sahara was so grateful to Ishiro Honda that he worked with him repeatedly throughout the rest of his career, even though he was getting a lot of offers for other movies, including Frank Sinatra in None But the Brave. He always come back to Ishiro Honda because, one, he loved Ishiro Honda. He genuinely liked working with Ishiro Honda. Ishiro Honda was a great man to work with. And also because he was grateful to Ishiro Honda for giving him the chance to have a career. But Kenji Sahara was a very dedicated man to the form of acting. In fact, he was so dedicated to the role that during the scene where the mind caves in and he gets trapped, right, the beginning of his disappearance, he got hurt really bad. He accidentally went the wrong way, and a big boulder, which they weren't actual boulders, but they were still really heavy, came down and just hit him right in the chest, right? And nearly broke his collarbone. And he said it hurt terribly, but he pushed through the rest of the scene anyways. The take is in the movie. You should watch it. Watch it frame by frame and you can actually see it. But the take is in the movie. So the scene where they find Shigeru after the massive earthquake, and there's a great map painting that shows the entire mountain just caved in and all the actors running down into it. Great map painting. When they're examining him, there's a bruise on his chest. That wasn't makeup, that was his actual bruise. So I was like, oh god, that's ugly. So props to Kenji Sahara for that. But also, this film was shot in color, which was very new for Japan. I mean, Japan kind of America got into the color craze back in the late 1930s. I mean, there were color films before that. Look at the original Phantom of the Opera with Lon Chaney. But you had films like The Wizard of Oz, Gone with the Wind, and stuff like that that made color started making it popular. And you had a couple isolated color movies throughout the 40s, and then in the early 50s especially, that was when we started experimenting with widescreen and color and stereophonic sound. Now Japan, of course, being probably about 20 years behind us, really, in terms of cinema at the time, even though now I can think they're actually kind of ahead of us, they have this film, so it's in color. They're going to shoot it in color, and it's one of the first films in Japan to ever be colored, period. It was one of the first movies to ever be like, oh, wow. Here's what you have. And it's kind of surprising because I have that classic media DVD case that was double billed with both this movie, Rodan, and War of the Gargantuas. And the War of the Gargantuas, we'll get into more when I talk about that movie, but War of the Gargantuas, the Japanese cut is very grainy and has almost like a blue tint throughout the entire movie. The Japanese print to Rodan is fucking gorgeous, and I mean that. For a movie that was treated like shit when it came out, for a movie that's gone through a lot of wear and tear, like the original Godzilla, for a movie that was shot in such a delicate form of film stock, the movie is very beautiful. The Japanese cut of the film is very, very beautifully preserved. While I watched the American cut as well, and the American cut is very grainy, and the colors are very faded, and it looks awful. It looks like what I'd expect the Japanese cut to look like. Because normally, the Japanese cuts to a movie look worse than the American cut, because the Japanese didn't take care of them as well as we did for some fucking reason I don't quite understand, but whatever. They didn't take care of their films, they didn't preserve their films like we tried to preserve our films. It's just a cultural thing, I think. So watching the Japanese cut to Rodan, which is the superior cut, It's so beautiful to look at because you see all the colors, you see just how much hard work went into it. The print is just gorgeous. I mean, it looks so good considering when it was made. I mean, yeah, some of the shots, the colors are faded, or you'll see that the blacks look a little blue, or you'll see, you know, the snow on the screen, but that's to be expected because this movie was not preserved very well. And the fact that it looks as good as it does is beyond amazing. And that's because the Japanese did wind up restoring it a little bit for this release. They did. And this, trust me, this isn't Criterion Collection levels of restoring. If you want to know just how good Criterion Collection is at restoring stuff, look at their Godzilla Blu-ray. Oh, gorgeous. But another thing that was very ambitious this was mainly Agent Tsuburaya, but this was very, very ambitious, period, was the fact that this film, the effects were shot not at nighttime, but in broad daylight. Godzilla and Godzilla Raids Again, and even, you know, Half Human, the special effects heavy scenes were shot at night, and for a good reason. They were shot at night so that they could hide a lot of the iffy looking stuff with the visual effects. They were shot at night because it was easier to control the lighting, and it was easier to mask a lot of the problems the sets had. This film had the balls, Agent Tsuburaya had the balls of shooting this in the daylight, which meant a lot more detail had to be put into the miniatures, a lot more detail had to be put into the matte paintings, a lot more detail had to be put in the suits, and a lot more detail was going to have to be put into the wire works of this movie. And considering the fact that Rodan is a flying kaiju, yes, they had to put a lot of emphasis on trying their best to mask the wires. And because it was shot in the daylight, it was very hard to do that. And, you know, it's not perfect. I mean, there are some scenes where I'm like, oh, look, like, for example, the wire works on the jets, and when Rodan is flying, or where the Rodan puppet is flying, basically the whole dogfight sequence, they are shot gorgeously. They are wonderfully executed, like with the rockets firing off of the jet wings. You can see the rockets and stuff, or them firing their machine guns, or the jet banking around to follow the Rodan puppet. Wonderful stuff. It looks great, and they hid the wires very well. You actually have to really, really, really look to see the wires. And of course, me being the fanatic I am for these kind of visual effects, of course I looked for the wires. Which I have to say, on a little side note, I'm not... like, whenever I see a wire in one of these movies or stuff like that, I'm not like, ha ha ha, look at the wires like, you know, most people are. I've always found myself, and this is why I'm such a geek for this stuff, I'm like, oh, cool, look at that, like, because a lot of these movies I saw as a kid, and I never noticed it, and as an adult watching these movies, I'm like, oh, cool, look, that's how they did it, or, oh, cool, look, that's how they made it move from point A to point B, oh, look, there's the wire, that's so cool, there's somebody controlling that up. I freak out over that stuff, and I love that stuff. That's why I'm a special effects freak. That's why I love watching these movies to this day, is seeing just how they made the movies look as good as they did. I mean, yes, without a shadow of a doubt, they look fake and clunky compared to today's effects. I mean, I won't ever deny that, but they look so cool nonetheless, because I'm like, this was made with blood, sweat, and guts. This was made with pure imagination. This was made behind a computer, and that's not knocking computer effects. I'm not knocking computer effects, because that's a lot of work too. It's just a different kind of work, and I've said that many times. There are scenes with Rodan when he's attacking Fukuoka where you can clearly see the wires. I mean, I can tell that they tried to hide them, but considering the fact that Haruo Nakajima was in this Rodan suit and, you know, he weighed X amount of weight and the suit weighed X amount, and so basically they couldn't make the wires too thin or else they snapped. In fact, that actually happened. I mean, it's common knowledge by now, but in case it isn't, it's common knowledge that what happened when Rodan was taking off out of the water, it's common knowledge now that what happened was a wire snapped and Haruo Nakajima fell 25 feet. 25 feet. That's as tall as King Kong. And thankfully, the wings were wide enough and bulky enough that it absorbed most of the shock, because I believe if those wings weren't as big as they were, Haruo Nakajima would have died in that fall. And he actually, because of the wings absorbing most of the shock, he just had a few scrapes and bruises. He wasn't. In fact, he went on the next day. He was like, nope, fuck that shit. I'm going to continue playing Rodan, which is why I love Haruo Nakajima. Haruo Nakajima has fucking balls. Like there's none of that in Hollywood now. But just imagine if the wings didn't absorb the shock and Haruo Nakajima died. That's just let that sink in for a little bit. Because I mean, then we wouldn't have Godzilla's character wouldn't have been the same. You know, just so much would have been different in the tokusatsu realm, or in the kaiju realm in general. That's a terrifying thought. But anyways, there are quite a few scenes in Rodan. Like, there's this one shot where after the tanks, like, just unload into Rodan, there's a scene where it's like he tries to take off, and there's like this epic Akira Ifukube music. It's like brr, 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 brr. And so anyways, Rodan takes off, he flaps his wings out and then lifts up. Okay, first off, the wire work is really cool because they timed it just perfectly with the wings. As Haruo Nakajima flapped down, they lifted the suit. Unfortunately, what happened is you can clearly see the wires holding him up, especially there's one that kind of attaches to his back. And you can clearly fucking see it. Now, I can kind of forgive it because, as I just stated earlier, they couldn't make the wires too thin because then they wouldn't hold up his weight. They wouldn't hold Haruo Nakajima's weight and the suit's weight because the suit was still very bulky. Whew. But, so yeah, you can see the wires there. And granted, the American cut managed to edit the movie in a way where they removed a lot of the shots where the wires were clearly visible. Like, for example, that shot that I just mentioned of Rodan taking off is not in the American cut. It's only in the Japanese cut. You know, stuff like that. So you can unfortunately see the wires. This isn't a perfect movie. And also they could put, you know, part of the reason why the crew here was able to put more details into the miniatures and the tanks and so on and so forth was because Rodan wasn't as big as Godzilla. Godzilla was 50 meters tall, which is 164 feet tall if you're here in America like I am. Rodan was 70, 80 feet tall, so that they could put more miniatures into the set, because the miniatures could be larger in scale with the Rodan suit. And, you know, it was kind of like War of the Gargantuas in that way, because they could, you know, put this there, they could do this, they could add in like a hook here, they could add in a door here that actually works, they could add lights in there. And because of that, it looks great. It does. It looks absolutely fantastic. Can I tell they're models? Fuck yeah, I can. But considering the fact that we're shot in the day, this was made in 1956, this is one of Eiichi Tsuburaya's like experiment pieces, this looks utterly gorgeous. It does. I mean, it's just amazing to look at. Fucking, wow. This movie aesthetically, like almost all of these tokusatsu movies, even the really bad ones, is just absolutely gorgeous. So let's talk about the Rodin design, because I love the Rodin design. This will always be my favorite Rodan design. Out of all the Rodans, from the Heisei to Millennium to the rest of the Showa series, this Rodan design is amazing for one big reason. This design is so utterly terrifying. I mean, I love how his eyes look kind of like a shark's, where it's like they're black. They're just black and hidden in shadow. I love that. And because of that, he looks very menacing, but yet there's also a quality of innocence to him as well. He's not, I mean, he's menacing, but he's menacing in a way of, this is a monster that's frightened and attacking back because he's frightened. Now, I also love this red tinge to his skin. You know, a lot of monsters that are made out after this and so on and so forth, with probably the exception of Mothra, have a very, like, charcoal gray. I mean, Anguirus was that way, Godzilla was definitely that way. A charcoal gray, black kind of skin to it. Because this movie, I believe this is solely made for the purpose because this movie was made in color. I believe that this Rodan was colored red because it would look or stand out more because this movie was made in color. And I love the tinge of his skin. It's a red, but it's not as red as like the Heisei and Millennium Rodan. I don't like that color red for my Kaiju, for my Rodan. I like my Rodan this kind of brownish, dirt brown, dirt red kind of color to him. It makes him look very organic and very prehistoric, and I love that. I love the formation of his beak. I love the teeth inside his mouth. I adore that. The puppet is actually really good in this movie. It actually matched the suit, unlike the ones from the original Godzilla, and especially in Godzilla Raids Again, it actually matched the position of the mouth in the suit. It actually looked like it was a part of the suit. And this will always be my favorite rendition of Rodan's roar, because this Rodan is very terrifying. Especially his main roar. His big roar is just, terrifying. Like, I could only imagine hearing the original roar of Rodan in the theaters and the shivers that would go up my spine. I mean, I get shivers listening to that roar now when I just have it on my little tiny TV screen right behind this sheet right here. This roar is so amazing. And this is why. It's terrifying at times. It's terrifying when it needs to be terrifying, but yet sad at others. You know, it's very much like the original Godzilla, where there's scenes where he's supposed to roar and his roar is supposed to sound menacing, and yet at the same time, like, his death is supposed to sound very, very sad and very, very tragic. Here, there's no exception. The scenes where the Rodans die, the screams and the yells of agony and sadness that the Rodans portray comes out in the roars. Just a props to the sound designing team for that. The Fukuoka attack. I love the Fukuoka attack. I love the sound effects. The sound effects is the thing that really makes this gel together. I mean, sure, the visuals are great, but the sound effects gel together. I actually like the sound of the tanks and the artillery better in the American cut than I do the Japanese cut, because they're louder and more in your face. Because that scene is very in your face. You have all these sound effects going on at one time, and in the Japanese cut, the tanks, when they fire, the sound kind of meshes in with the background sound effects. In the American cut, you hear just whoosh. Patrick Galvin uses those sound effects in his stop motion movies, which I'm like, yes, thank you. But they go whoosh. It stands out, and you just get shivers, because me being a sound effect guy, or me loving the art of the sound design, it's just, I just love the American cut. I love the sound effect. But the music is better in the Japanese cut. Akira Ifukube adds this score. First off, the music to this movie by Akira Ifukube is by far the darkest and most well-composed music in terms of tone with the movie that he's ever done. And I mean that. I mean, I have my favorite scores for Akira Ifukube, but the tonality of his music fits with every scene that's played in so perfectly and so crisp. It's beautiful. It reminds me of, guess what, the original Godzilla. So yeah, props to that. But the music here is very good as well, and it's energetic, but not too energetic. It's not like in some scenes in The Mysterians. I mean, it's energetic, like, oh my god, there's all this shit going on, but yet it's not like in your face, like going so fast, and yet the action's going so slow. It's a great balancing point. And especially when the Rodans take off from Fukuoka and fly away, and you're just left with the flames and stuff like that, there's this absolutely horrific music playing that you're left with your mouth agape, like, oh my god, look at this fucking destruction. I mean, look at it. And it's wonderfully done. The scene works so much better with that sort of underlying ambient Akira Ifukube music than without. The Fukuoka attack itself is just extremely well executed and extremely well done. In fact, it's without a doubt the highlight of this movie. I mean, sure, it's shorter than the Godzilla attack, and a lot less is destroyed than in the Godzilla attack. But there's a lot more flames, there's a lot more energy going on here than in the original Godzilla attack. Well, the original Godzilla attack wasn't supposed to have energy. It was supposed to be, this is just a walking beast capable of so much destruction. In this movie, there's a lot of, because there's a lot of, it's the wind effect. The wind effects keeps things moving in the scene, so immediately because of that, there's a lot more energy on the screen anyways, with like stuff and debris flying across the screen all the time, explosions going off in the air, tanks moving on the ground, Rodan constantly flapping his wings and trying to take off, but the tanks won't let him take off. Stuff like that. It adds a huge level of utter energy to this scene that just keeps you watching and keeps you glued to the screen. Absolutely beautifully done. And the wind effects is just great, because you see things like smashing up against buildings. You can actually, there's like one scene where it's like this oil tanker smashes into a building and catches the building on fire as it explodes. You can actually feel the weight of these miniatures, because they're also shot in high speed, and that also adds weight to it. You have the tanks moving about. It's just a beautifully composed effects scene that relies almost solely on the mastery of Eiji Tsuburaya's capability of pulling his crew together like usual and pulling something off that seems impossible, but he managed to do it in an almost flawless way. The only flaws with the scene are really the water. The number one thing that I like about the sound effects of this movie and so on and so forth is the fact that you can hear people fucking screaming during the attack sequence. You hear people just screaming in utter terror as the Rodans fly over the city and one of them lands and stuff like that. It's purely terrifying. And adding in those screams and stuff like that gave it a level, again, added both some more energy to it, but yet added another level of realism to it as well. Because the original Godzilla, there are huge periods of time where Godzilla is walking. There's no sound effects at all other than maybe his footsteps or the sound of burning buildings. And granted, in that movie, it works. The screaming sound effects that you hear of people screaming and running that is used in Rodan would not have worked in Godzilla, and that's quietness in Godzilla wouldn't have worked here. So it's great. It's well done here. Another thing I like about this movie is that about this attack scene is that the Rodans clearly don't do as much damage to Fukuoka as, you know, Godzilla does to Tokyo. But they play on the idea that because, you know, the Rodans have that supersonic wind power and they fly, the wind spread the flames a lot further than just the utter destruction of the Rodans flying over the city. So I fucking love that they played with that. And it's beautifully shot because the immediate scene after the Rodans attack, you have all the military guys running into this rundown building that was clearly just like almost destroyed in the attack. You have like all these broken windows, all these broken window sills all over the place. You have beams falling over. And they have this, what I like about this is they have a shredded map of Fukuoka. And they're looking at that and they're running in. Oh, beautifully done. And you have the flickering of the fire in the background. Wonderful shit. And I mean wonderfully executed shit. Just props to the set design and prop to the lighting department for managing to pull off such like a level of dread and level of destruction not seen in a lot of... Now, it would be a sin not to talk about the Meganura in this. Man, just say that these fucking things terrified me as a kid. I mean that. They fucking terrified me. And because of these Meganura and them eating people and them killing people rather brutally, and you actually seeing a lot of that brutality in this film, this movie has a lot more gore than what I expect a normal Ishiro Honda movie to have. This movie, because it shows a lot of that. That is another Kimura trait. Is that Kimura is very grounded in reality, while Shinichi Sekizawa, I think, if that's not his name, please forgive me, but the other writer was very fantastical. Kimura was very set in reality, and I believe that was Kimura's writing that inspired Ishiro Honda to go with the more gritty, realistic route. And because of that, I remember as a kid, when it played on TV, the viewer discretion advised box popped up on the screen, and my mother was very questionable in letting me watch it when I was a little kid. And the only way she'd let me watch it was if my father was there with me. And so my father sat down with me and we'd watched Rodan on TV. I remember that very, very distinctly, and I will always treasure that moment. But I do remember that. But let me tell you, just everything with these just creep me out. And one of the things that really creeps me out with the Meganura design is the movement of these bugs, of these insects. They move so unearthly, so unnaturally, that you're like, ugh. Like, you see those things and you're like, oh, Jesus Christ. Like, what if you ran into that thing in the middle of the night? You'd, one, probably fucking die. But two, you'd shit your goddamn pants. Because these things look like they actually crawled out of the rotting hole in hell that they actually came from. So props to the designing department there. And I also feel bad for the suit actor in those things, because he had to be, like, hunched over and everything, and, oh, God. I mean, just type up a picture of the design of the original Meganura, and you'll understand what I talk about when I say poor suit actor. But I actually used these Meganura, these specific Meganura from this movie, I use in Godzilla and King Kong. In fact, those are the first creatures that the crew that lands on the island that Kong is on encounter, are these Meganura. In fact, I'm designing them, taking that red tinge to them, I'm taking the eye design, I'm taking how they move, everything is inspired by this movie. But But let me tell you, the first scene that we see these things, oh, it is wonderfully executed, don't get me wrong, but it is so utterly terrifying. It's, oh, these things, as a kid, I would like cringe. I'd hide behind the couch whenever they came on, and my father would be laughing hysterically. And it makes me excited to show this movies to a little kid to see if they have like the same reaction. You sadistic asshole, but you know, these are terrifying to look at. You know, and there's just a lot of good things done here. And the Japanese cut has a lot more shots with the Meganura, which I don't know why the American cut spliced those shots out, but like of them moving, like of the worm moving through the village or climbing to the top of the coal hill, stuff like that. Those are cut out of the American cut. But I love the shot where it breaks through Shigeru's and his girlfriend's house, and you have the police cop shooting it, and it does nothing to detour this worm thingy, and it's just pushing things out of the way as it walks in. Beautifully choreographed and beautifully executed. I love that shit. And then it's also nice that these worms have a purpose. They don't just randomly show up and then we forget about them. These worms do serve a purpose because these turn out to be food for the baby Rodan. When it hatches out, when Shigeru sees it hatch out of the egg, the baby Rodan eats them. So it actually makes logical fucking sense. That being said, you know, with all these great stuff that I've been talking about with this movie, there are some problems with the script. There are. And here are the biggest ones. It is funny how everyone seems to, like, when Rodan takes off and flies towards Fukuoka, everybody points out and be like, oh, look, it's Rodan, all the civilians. Well, how the fuck did they know it's Rodan when the military just called the beast Rodan like 3 hours earlier? Like, how do all these people know? So that's a little bit of a plot hole. I hate Akihiko Horata's in this movie. He plays a stereotypical scientist. His character's explanation as to why the Rodans have woken up annoys me. I mean, granted, he does say that it's because the Earth warmed up, and that with Mount Aso just waking up and stuff like that, with the hotter weather than normal, kind of just brought the eggs back to life out of a state of hibernation. That's what I would have stuck with their explanation. But no, there's this pointless atomic bomb stop nukes allegory thrown into this movie that doesn't need to be there. And that was solely Ishiro Honda's doing. And I know that was Ishiro Honda's doing, and I'm like, no, why? I mean, yes, it's a good message, but it doesn't work with this movie. Just leave it to the fact, because there's all this wonderful foreshadow with the weather dialogue at the beginning of this movie as to why these monsters would wake up. You don't need to throw in this one-liner about there being, you know, an atomic bomb explosion going off, and it just happened to wake up these dinosaurs all the way across the ocean, by the way. So it doesn't make sense of that route either. You know, those are. There was also another one. Is I hate the fact that there's a couple that gets killed by Rodan, right? They go to the mountain. They go to the mouth of the volcano to take a couple like honeymoon pictures. And the Rodan shows up and eats him. First off, there's this great visual effects shot that is cut out of the American cut of the film, but it's in the Japanese version, where the silhouette or the shadow of Rodan flies over the couple. Very menacing, mixed with that fucking brooding, dark music by Akira Ifukube. And I'm like, why in God's name would you cut that out of the American version? Because it's so menacing, I don't know. But whatever. So again, they have that picture. They developed the photographs taken by the camera of these victims, and they see the Rodan's wing and his foot, right? Kind of an iconic shot. And so immediately, and I mean immediately, Akihiko Horata's like, dinosaur, and goes to the library and says, oh, look, it matches a pterodon. We must be dealing with a pterodon. Of course, a pterodon. You know, that makes perfect sense, right? In a logical world, that is immediately what I jump to is a dinosaur. No. In the real world, I'd say this looks kind of like a bird. And granted, they do bring up that it kind of looks like the wing of a plane, but it's too curved to be a wing of a plane. And sort of like, it does look like a bird. I would have left it at that. And then I would have had, when Shigeru regains his mind, or regains his memories of Rodan, show him the picture, right? And he says, that kind of looks like what I saw. And then have him look at a picture of a pterodon, because he was looking at pictures of dinosaurs earlier, and have him see the pterodon and be like, oh, look at that. And that's how they start drawing connections. It just would have made more sense than Akihiko Hirata immediately going, oh, look, it's a fucking pterodactyl. No, it doesn't make much sense. I'm sorry. That being said, we all know that Honda is the fucking master of allegory. We all know that, hands down, yada yada yada. We all know that he loves his allegory. Honda's true allegory, yes, he has some atomic bomb shit with that one-liner, but that's not the main allegory of this movie. Ishiro Honda put into this movie something that a lot of science fiction monster movies, or science fiction movies in general, don't like to tackle. It's because they don't have the best writers. He put into this movie that the idea that love triumphing over all forms of life. That love is the greatest force in any man's life, or anyone's life. And this comes out in the parallel lines between the Rodans and Shigeru and his girlfriend, or fiance, Kyo. And the parallel lines that follow between them. Now let's get some background of Kyo and Shigeru. They are a well-written romance. I mean, it's not the best thing ever, don't get me wrong. But it is really good. Ishiro Honda was very cautious about putting too much love and too much affection into his movies, because Ishiro Honda was very uncomfortable doing that. He was. He was very good at portraying friendships between characters, but he wasn't very good at portraying romances. Yes, he's made quite a few romance movies before this, but he's very well known for being very careful with those, and he'd never like to tackle them too well. So in this movie, you tell that these two are in love because of that friendship, and you know, Ishiro Honda's willingness, or his conservatism of showing this romance really actually works to this movie's benefits, because there's no kissing, there's only embracing, there's only hugging, there's only eye contact, and that says it all to me, and it's wonderfully well done. There's a scene, like, what happens is, what sets this movie off again is that there's kind of like a conflict between Kyo's brother, Goro, and this other guy, and they find the other guy murdered, and everyone blames it on Goro, right? And Kyo is hurt terribly because of that, because everybody just wants to kill her because they think that her brother, Goro, is responsible for the murders. The scenes where Shigeru always comes to her house and comforts her is very good. It's very good, because you can tell that he cares for her, and you can tell that she puts on a smile right in daylight, but then all of a sudden when she's alone, she just breaks down. And the fact that she has Shigeru there is a wonderful touch, and that he's there for her. He will always be there for her, and he genuinely loves her. Now that plays a role a little bit later on, because the scene where Shigeru is recovered after the cave-in, you know, he has amnesia. He can't remember shit. He can't remember how to speak. He can understand you, but he can't speak, and he tries so hard to remember. First off, great performance by Kenshi Sahara. What's interesting is that who is one of the first people that goes and sees him? It's Kyo. Kyo immediately bursts through the doors, and she comes right in, right by his side, kneels down beside him, and she's so happy to see him, but yet he can't remember her, so she's just devastated by that. Great acting by the actress who plays her as well. And she, throughout those scenes, until he regains his memory, she is never seen without him. She is there by his side the entire time. Like, he was beside her. When she needed him, she was beside him when he needed her. Beautiful shit going on there. Which great acting by Kenshi Sahara too in that scene. Because she's like, I'm your fiance, and he's looking at her, right? And the look on his face is like, I'm trying so hard to remember you. I'm trying so hard. But yet he can't. And so he looks away, he doesn't know what to do. And he feels terrible by that. And you can tell that he feels terrible by that. And then she becomes devastated, blah, 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 blah. Great stuff. The point of why I'm saying that is because there is clearly a love between these two characters. There is clearly an affection between these two characters, and it's beautifully done, beautifully executed. I love this stuff. And now I bring that up because these are the parallels with the Rodans, because the Rodans are mates. They are. They're in love with each other, or because they're the only two left of their species alive. And so when the first Rodan that attacks Fukuoka is in trouble, what happens? the other one comes immediately to its aid to help it get out. Immediately, without hesitation, suddenly the second Rodan shows up to help him escape, to help him get out of there. And they fly off together and they remain together for the remaining 15 minutes of the movie. Immediately, so they go out there and they help each other, right? And so the next scene, they're, you know, and why does that second Rodan show up? The second Rodan shows up because the first Rodan needed help, and so the second Rodan comes in and is right there by the first Rodan's side. What's interesting is the scene that directly follows that, during the evacuation scenes of Mount Aso, Kyo stays behind and finds Shigeru, because Shigeru is in great danger of the volcano erupting, putting himself in great danger. And what does she do? She stays right by his side that entire time. And they meet each other, and you can tell that he doesn't want her there because she might get hurt, but yet he's very happy to see her there because, well, she's the love of his life, and she's happy to be there because he's the love of her life, and that she felt it was her duty to be there with her fiance. And it's a wonderful parallel line between the two. Now that goes even further during the Rodan's death scene. So what happens is, like, the military surround Mount Aso because it's a warm climate where the Rodans are like nesting, and so they decide to make the volcano erupt. And so the mountain starts erupting, right? What's a nice little touch about this is that both Rodans are clearly terrified of what's going on. They don't know what's going on. They're in all this stuff, so they're hiding. They're hiding in these caves, and some great shots of, like, the heads just barely popping out of the caves and then popping back in as an explosion goes off. They're scared shitless, right? Because they always pop out and then they hide in a cave. They only try to escape when they absolutely need to try to escape, because or else they're going to die. And they only escape when the volcano starts erupting. One of these Rodans could have easily have gone away. It flies around the crater and waits for the other one. And there's shots of it flying around the crater. And it's waiting for the other one to get out as well. But by the time the other one escapes, it's too late. That one has just, it's too late. It's engulfed by the gases, it's engulfed by the heat, and it lands in the lava and starts burning to death, and starts screaming in agony, right? Very sad shit, okay? So I'm expecting the other one to fly away and it to end with a the end sign, you know, that kind of stuff. But no, it does something that no other monster movie, really to my knowledge, even attempts to do. What happens is as one of the Rodans is burning to life, the one that escaped doesn't fly away but comes back. It comes back and not only dies with its mate, it specifically lands itself on top of the other Rodan, and it looks like they embrace each other, and they both burn to death. They both are engulfed by the flames. They both die with each other. In fact, in the American version, there's actually a line that I really like where it says, "One could not live without the other," and I love that line, even though it's not in the Japanese cut. But that line, "one cannot live without the other," really focuses on both Shigeru and Kyo's relationship as well as the Rodan's relationship, because Shigeru is holding Kyo as they watch this happening, and they just, like, glance at each other and know, like, this is them as well. And I fucking love those parallel lines there, and it is a very powerful ending. And I have to admit, it's all because of Akira Ifukube's score. Akira Ifukube managed to present a level of sympathy and a level of empathy for these two Rodans that wouldn't have worked with any other score, and I mean that. Beautiful stuff. Beautiful stuff. Very sad, very tragic, very Ishiro Honda. In fact, that theme of love, that theme of one cannot live without the other, very much so inspired my relationship with the Godzillas in my Godzilla saga. Very much so inspired me, especially in Godzilla King Kong with both Minla and Godzilla. It inspired me there, that one cannot live without the other. So I owe Rodan a lot. That's part of the reason why this movie is such a personal, and why this video is so long, is because this is such a personal movie for me. This movie is just absolutely beautiful. It is a gorgeous film. It's one of Ishiro Honda's best. It really, truly is. This movie's a masterpiece. And because it's a masterpiece, I give this movie easily a 4 out of 4. This movie is 4 out of 4 stars. This movie is gorgeous. Just go out there, buy the DVD, support this movie. It's fucking amazing. Go fucking watch it. It's so good. Well, that being said, do stay tuned for more episodes of Ishiro Honda-thon. Not sure what's coming next, but we'll see what happens. Like my movie Which Way They Walk. In fact, the day I'm recording this, we're actually begin filming the second session of filming tonight. So yeah, by the time this goes up, we would have already filmed quite a bit. So like Which Way They Walk on Facebook, help support us there, help spread the word. Like AN Productions on Facebook, and if you wish, join the group, our new group, Geeks for Geeks, which is where you can both promote yourself and be who you want to be. Just share what you love. It could be anything. There's been a recent conversation that we're having about Alien 3, the assembly cut versus the theatrical cut, which is a very entertaining conversation. I love it. But this is a great group. Go ahead and join us there if you wish. So, in the end, this is Adam Noyes of AN Productions saying, sayonara.